This is a word of caution to anyone out there who might be looking at getting the Atomos Shinobi 2. I was very excited when I got mine. You see, I've been filming with the Shinobi 1 for quite a while, years at this point. I think it's a great monitor. It's really nice because I don't need to record externally. A lot of times I'm recording internally on the camera, and I just need a nice 5-inch monitor that kind of gives me a better look at what I'm filming. And the long and the short of it is on the Shinobi 2, I've had a lot of issues with overheating. I'm going to explain kind of why I think that is, and it's something you definitely want to be on the lookout for if this is the type of monitor that you might be considering buying, because when you look at it on paper, Atomos announced the Shinobi 2. It's brighter, it's lighter, it's thinner, and it just sounds, and it's a good price point. I think they're like $350. It's not anything super, super expensive. And all things considered, that sounds like a great option. Brighter, lighter, thinner, awesome. But you see, the problem comes down to how they handled their thermal management. At least this is my take on it. It's the best I can deduce of why I'm having issues overheating on the Shinobi 2. You'll notice I don't have the Shinobi 2 here because I returned it, considering this is a pretty critical flaw from my perspective. And it's really unfortunate that so many products these days are struggling with their thermal management, whether it's cameras or monitors. There's so much stuff that's overheating. And this has been the case, I want to say, since like the Canon R5. Before that, I didn't really notice a lot of products that would struggle with heat and management. I live in Arizona, so it's quite hot here. And if we're filming outside, things tend to get warm. And it's so unfortunate that so many products now have this terrible, terrible problem of overheating in what I would consider pretty normal conditions. It's not, we're not filming, in the Arctic where it's super cold. It's warm, especially in the summertime, things get hot. So I would expect my camera, my monitor, everything, if it's a professional tool, to stay working. Now you'll notice on the Shinobi 1, the vents up here at the top are like right at the top of the monitor. There's nothing obstructing it. So I've never had an issue with the Shinobi 1, even filming outside in 110, 115 degree weather. That's Fahrenheit. And, there's vents up at the top. There's even, I think, what appears to be a vent at the bottom on the Shinobi 1. Now, you'll see if you look at photos of the Shinobi 2, all of that venting was consolidated right to where the battery attaches. That's the Sony style NPF batteries, which I have right here. And if I plug this in on the Shinobi 1 and just lock it in, because that's how I tend to power these monitors, is using that Sony slot, you'll see that all these vents are still open and they're not being blocked or obstructed in any way. The monitor can cool itself, it can vent any heat with those fans and stay working and powered on for quite a while. Now, the Shinobi 2 is not like that. That vent being right behind that battery, if you're putting even a dummy battery or a big battery like this one, it blocks that vent. And that's the only thing I could chalk it up to why I was having these issues with the Shinobi 2. You see, it would display basically the brightness, in your phone when it gets too hot or there's some issue going on with the display, it'll slightly dim and dim and dim to the point where you're like trying to adjust your brightness. Yeah, the Shinobi 2 will do that if it gets too hot. And so the display, the bright display, I think it's like, 1500 nits or something, whatever their rating is on the Shinobi 2, that's brighter than the Shinobi 1. It'll get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And then the weird thing is it kind of like cycles back up. And basically it like blacks out and then it comes back full brightness. And then it'll dim and it'll dim, 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 all the way down to blackout. So imagine trying to film and your screen is just dimming like you see on your smartphone sometimes. It's very, very frustrating. It's really not something you want to have to handle on a proper shoot. And I will say that theoretically, the workaround, or maybe why this isn't a deal breaker for some, is that on the Shinobi 2, I believe you can power it or charge it via the USB-C input. So theoretically, you could have a Shinobi 2 rigged in a way that didn't use the Sony battery slot, and that might help you bypass this thermal management issue. But that leads me to some of my other problems with the Shinobi 2 and why this alone was a deal breaker for me, but there's other factors on top of it that don't really, I can't really say it's a good deal. I would actually definitely go for the Shinobi 1 as my preferred monitor of choice these days. The issues on the Shinobi 2 is in addition, because it's brighter, it actually uses battery faster. And that can be annoying when you're out in the field and you've only got a handful of batteries and you want to keep things powered up and charged as long as possible. The brighter display to me was not enough of an advantage to sacrifice the reduced battery life. You'll see this on your smartphone. Again, if you're running at full brightness, your battery will drain a lot quicker than even if 75% brightness or half brightness, which for a lot of times is more than enough. If you're inside or even outside and you don't mind squinting a little bit, you can usually get by. And honestly, it's something I've never even had an issue with on the Shinobi 1. This monitor is plenty bright for me to film outside. Now, granted, there's certain scenarios where there's a lot of glare or, I might have to like cover it a little bit, but I feel like that's pretty normal for any monitor, unless it was like ultra super bright, at which point maybe you're paying a lot higher premium. But for me, the Shinobi 2 was not bright enough to justify now I'm getting reduced battery performance. And so I have to have more batteries with me. I have to think about charging them or turning things off in between takes. I kind of like stuff that's foolproof and you kind of set it and forget it. And you don't have to worry about managing your tech all day long. You can focus on being creative and not as technical. Yes, behind the scenes, you might want to optimize or set things up or configure things a certain way. But once it's time to film and enter production, whether you're doing photography or video, I don't want to have to be thinking about how much battery life my monitor has, or do I need to reduce the brightness, or what I need to do to kind of optimize during a shoot, considering those conditions. I want something that's just basically going to work. And the Shinobi 1 is great. It's all of those things. Shinobi 2, the brightness comes at eating it through that battery quicker. So it's overheating, it's reducing my battery life. And the other benefits of being lighter and thinner ended up being like not that big of a deal, all things considered. The Shinobi 1, it's plenty light and thin as it is. I don't really struggle with feeling like it's big and it's bulky. If it was a 7-inch monitor, maybe I do find those a little obnoxious for their size. But for a 5-inch monitor, I think the Shinobi 1 is great. The way it's built, everything's nice. They did switch kind of where the ports are on the Shinobi 2. The HDMI is on the back, and that's also kind of an inconvenience. You'd think the HDMI being on the back would make it more sleek and low profile, which it is. But if you think about how you plug things in, you're very rarely on the other side if you're a solo shooter. Now, if someone's helping you out and you've got like an AC there or something, yeah, plugging into the back is fine. But for me, and the way I like to film, having the HDMI on the side makes it quicker to set up. I mean, we're talking seconds. It's not like a huge time savings, whether it's on the back or the side. But I can hold my camera, as I currently am, and plug in a monitor on the side because I don't have to be behind the screen. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of a minor nitpick, but I found the HDMI being on the back not to be that great of an advantage. You've also got that USB-C port on the Shinobi 2, which isn't on the Shinobi 1. And theoretically, that would be nice if you were able to, charge a camera off of it. But in my setup with my Lumix system, I wasn't able to get enough power output from that USB-C port on the back of the Shinobi 2 to actually give the camera enough power. That might depend on if you're shooting Canon or Sony or Nikon. So results may vary depending on the camera model. But for me and my Lumix setup, that USB-C output on the back of the Shinobi 2 wasn't even all that useful for me because it just didn't fit with the stuff that I already have, and it ended up not being that big of an advantage. But again, the biggest deal breaker was the overheating, which I really wish I could stop talking about all these things overheating, whether it's the G9 Mark II or the Sony cameras or the Canon cameras. I'm sick of stuff overheating, and I don't know what the demands are, if this is a marketing demand from these companies saying we need to do X, Y, and Z, and engineering just can't make it work given their current configurations, and they have to shrink and compromise and basically sacrifice thermal management for the sake of making it thinner or lighter. But at the end of the day, look how small this is. I mean, this camera rig is not gigantic by any means, and this does everything I would need it to do. It doesn't overheat. This is the S5 Mark II, by the way. It has a fan. It has thermal management. I'm not asking it to film in 500 degrees or on the surface of the sun. I'm saying just in general, when we're out and about and it's the summertime and we need to film outdoors, even in the shade, there are far too many things that are compromised because of their thermal management. So if you're looking at getting the Shinobi 2, it could be a good monitor for you, but chances are it's probably not, and I would definitely express a word of caution if you film anywhere where if you're outside a lot, doing weddings or anything like that, and you're filming in uncontrollable conditions where you might have some direct sunlight hitting your stuff, I would kind of stay away from the Shinobi 2 and not for the Shinobi 1, because there's nothing wrong with the Shinobi 1. I think it's a great monitor. Atomos really hit it out of the park when they kind of released this, the 5-inch. I really like this model. It's got exactly what I need. All the tools, the built-in features, you can go look them up. It's got everything you need: waveform, scopes, all the stuff. LUT management. If you just need a monitor, the Atomos Shinobi is awesome. The Shinobi 2, I think they missed the mark a little bit. Again, considering the kind of engineering factor. The only fan I can see on the Shinobi 2 is the one that's in that Sony slot, which seems like a huge oversight. Probably some ways to work around it, but for me and the way I like to film, just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I returned it and went back to the Shinobi 1. And honestly, I don't feel like I'm missing anything. It's not like taking a step backwards. It's just a different product that does what I need, where the Shinobi 2 kind of misses that mark just a little bit.